Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we're Masechtas Avodah Zarah Daf Lamed Daled. We are going to begin on Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, about 8 lines from the top, with the story with Rabbi Akiva. So we've been learning in this parak about the dinim of Yain Nesach, and along those lines, the Gemara tells us the following: Rabbi Akiva ikla le ginzuk. So Rabbi Akiva chanced upon this particular location, and Bomine, they asked them a few questions. Misan l'shais o ein misan l'shais. Is a person able to make a tinus for hours? Says Rashi, kigain shekibul of tinus mishay shais l'malo. Let's say it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and you say, you know what, now is a good time, I might as well fast. Umihu lo tom klum adchil kol hayoim. So again, normally you have breakfast, you skip breakfast, it's 12 in the afternoon, you're like, you know, might as well make this a full fast day. So in that situation is the question. Again, originally you weren't intending to fast, it's just you skip breakfast, you were preoccupied, and all of a sudden you're like, you know what, maybe I should make this into a fast. Does it count as a fast day? So lo have a biyadeh. So he didn't have an answer. And then we have another question. This brings down this din, because this is what we're learning when it comes to these jugs, because maybe it absorbs yain nesach, so therefore we're strict. We don't know exactly what the din is. Is it mutter or usher? Does it absorb? We mentioned in yesterday's daf certain ways to be able to potentially remove the yain nesach out of these kalim. So again, lo habiyadeh, didn't know. So then third, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was Isaac during the 7 days before Aharon, the Kohen, took over as the Kohen Gadol. The question is, what did he wear? So we'll have a biyadeh. So again, did he wear the big day kahuna? So we'll discuss that. So also Shobim in Rosh Hashanah Hilchasa Misan L'Shais. First of all, the din is you can be Misan L'Shais. V'im Hishlim, if you complete the tinus, Mispal Tefillas tinus, then you actually will add the Tefillas tinus. You say Anenu V'Hilchasa, and this wraps up question 14. Kan kanim shavchavim liyachid beis chodesh mutarin. As long as you wait 12 months and it hasn't been used for 12 full months, it's mutter. Says Rashi Miyad bli tikun. Unbelievable. You don't have to do anything. However, if you want to use it before the 12 months, then mal b'mayim kida amran. So we mentioned different eights. This is again question 14. There's actually 3 things to do. So first of all, you could just let it sit around for 12 months, or you can fill it up with water for 3 consecutive days, and then each day you have to remove the water and put in new water, or you can put it into a kivshan eish, and that element of libun will cause the yain nesach to leave. Okay. And then finally, he wore a white shirt. On this, Rav Kahana Masti b'chol klovin she'ein by imra. It had no hem, says Rashi Shafa. So like, he didn't have like any pockets that maybe he took some of the money, which again is unbelievable that even Moshe Rabbeinu had to be careful, because you have to be nikim, you have to act cleanly among people. Now Rashi points out what was the whole problem with Moshe, because there's lo nishtamish b'di kahuna l'chsav yasisa b'di kodesh Aaron achicha fu hayazar etzloi. So Moshe was considered like a zar, like non-Kohen in relation to Aaron. We know that he wore clothes, we just don't know what it was. So that's the answer. Okay, so then we continue. So if you have the seeds and the peels of these grapes, so what is the din? So we go all the way back to our lengthy Mishnah on Chavtes Amid Beis. Let's just find this. So it says, Asurin, Yisurin Isur Hana. Rameir holds his mamash even asur hanach. Chachamim says it depends. Lachin asurin. If they're still moist, then they're asur. Yeveshin mutar. However, if they're dried up, then it's mutar. Okay, so with that said, let's continue and see this next piece of Gemara regarding this. Talking about chartznaima zogin, when it comes to the seeds and the peels of the grapes, shal v'chachavim lachnasum yeveshin mutar, which again is the sheet of the Tanakam, which the Chachamim as we mentioned. So hay ninhu lachan, hay ninhu yeveshin. Explain a little bit more. What does that mean? Wet, dry. So Rabbi Yehuda and Shmuel, lachin. What does it mean? It's moist. Kol yidbeis chaydish. Within the first 12 months. So again, we find this distinction of 12 months again. Itmar, we also learned, Omer Rabbi B'Barchano Rabbi Yochanan Chashain Asurin Afil B'Hana. When we say that they're Asur, it means it's not just Asur B'Achila, but it's even Asur B'Hana. Chashain Mutar Mutar Afil B'Achila. However, after Yud Beis Chaydish, because they're dried out, not only is it Mutar B'Hana, but it's even Mutar B'Achila. Amaz vid, hi dordaya dechamra doramoy, says Rashi. This is shemarim, the sediments of the wines of aramoyim. Bas triasa yarchi shaita shari. After 12 months, they're mutter. So Amarav Chabib Berei the Rabba Hani Gulfe. These jugs, bas triasa yarchi shaita sushari. Again, after 12 months, we're lenient. Amrav Chaviva Hani, as we continue to Lamed Daled Amud Beis. The Gemara says like this: Avta Detayi, says Rashi, Chemas Maor Av. You have these jugs which are made out of very thick hide of these Hoichi Drachim. Rashi says Naisa Naisa Moli Yayin Lis Umerachaik. They fill these up with wine as they are engaged in traveling. So Basa Teresa Yarche Shaita Shari, again after 12 months of non-use, they're mutter. Amar Bacha Beri de Rav Ika Hani Portsani Daramoy, says Rashi, the psoil shel like the remnant, the leftovers of the grapes. Basa Teresa Yarche Shaita Shari, Amar Bacha Beri de Rav Hani Gulfi Shechimi V'uchmi. So when it comes to these jugs, again, after 12 months, they're mutter. So all these things, we find that something magical happens after a whole year. Basically, it's nice on top of a gam, which usually is meis la'ace, but after a full year, it's all dried up and it's considered like it's nothing. And then the Mishnah mentioned something else, mentioned morius. So Rashi, the Mishnah over there said, Mahamorius, when it comes to like fish fats, vegavinas base, unki, this particular type of cheese, which is of an Ovid Chachamim, Asur Isur Hana, the Rameir Chachamim in Isur Hana. So again, once again, we have this Machlokes Rameir and the Tanakh and the Chachamim regarding these items. So, Tanraban, Morius Uman Mutter. If we're dealing with the Morius, if we're referring to this fish fat, but it belongs to a storekeeper, then it is mutter. Why? Says Rashi, uman mutter. Morius lo avdi medagim tameim. Because this morius, first of all, they're not made from non-kosher fish. Mishum chamra kasrinle. The whole isser potential is because of wine. The uman lo rami bechamra. However, a worker, a storekeeper, is not going to put wine in there. Okay. Because it's so fatty, it'll end up ruining the wine anyway. So there's no wine in it. So for storekeepers, you don't have to worry about it. He said this, Mishum in the name of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, Avchilik uman mutter. Even the, says Rashi, min dogim, taharim, these are specific types of fish, they are also mutter, says Rashi, uvikat nusai, because they're small, ein lo snaper vikas kases, the asid legadol achar zman. They don't have fins and scales because they're very small as far as growth, but eventually they will grow into developing fins and scales. Says Rashi, mipnei ma asura. So why would it be asura? Mipnei she'irvuna oil ima dugim tamein, because maybe non-kosher fishes will be mixed in together with them, domin law, which are similar to it, be'onima. V'hai chilik umin, kivan de umin hu ubak bedavar madilin himena. He's not concerned. He's going to be more meticulous because this is his craft, this is his trade, so he's not going to mix them in. So this type of a fish does not have any detectable fins and scales. Obviously, for it to be kosher, it has to have snapper v'kaskesas, it has to have fins and scales. However, this actually is a kosher fish because it will develop fins and scales, so therefore it is a fish, a min, which is kosher. However, the only problem is that it may commingle with other non-kosher fish, and you're not going to know the difference. However, an uman knows the difference, therefore not concerned. Tani avimi redu rabavoy morius uman mutter. Hu tani la v'hu oimer la pamrishain v'sheni mutter. The first and second time it's mutter, shlishi aser. The third not, says Rashi, shekain darkim nice and mayim umelach al shuman. This is what they do. They put water and salt on it, shuman hadagim, on the fattiness of the fish, maititzais shamnai, and they let it soak up. Okay, shekalis chayis of nice in the cherem. Then afterwards they end up putting in more. Shlishi aser, says the Gemara. Why? My time upon rishon v'sheni the nafish shumnaihu, because there's so much fat. Lo tzarich lamirmi b'hu chamra. It doesn't need to have any wine. In other words, like the fattiness, I guess, gives it a taste or some type of a preservative of sorts, and therefore, because it's of a high quality, because it has fattiness in it, so there's no need to add wine. So the first couple of times it's okay. Afterwards they put in wine, and that's where it becomes problematic. Hu Arba, the story of this ship, Demuryasa, that had this fish fattiness, the Asi Linamila, and it went to the port, to Akko. So landed in the city of Akko. And interesting, for Naturi, Rashi, the Nimila, it says port, right? Port Balaz. It's mamish the same thing. Port, right? Portland, Maine, Portland, Oregon. There's the reason why it's called a port. Interesting. Makam Shasvinos Oilis Bobia Basha. It's a place where they go for dry land. So it's mamish, it's the same word. Anyway, so Oyisiv Rami Bar Alba de Min Akoi Nituri Bahada. So he went there and he guarded it. So Amalei Rava Ad in the Manatra. Understand? Okay, it's great now that it's landed on the port. Now you're watching it, but who's watching this before? So Amalei Ad in until now Nichashla Yimishim de Ma'arbe Be Chamra. Before, right now we're concerned that maybe they're going to put wine into it. Kista demorius baluma, says Rashi, Shem Hamidah, this measurement, baluma for a zuz, b'midas Hashem chachavim, zeh yayin nimchar b'yoiker, wine was sold at a high price, demorius bezoil, and this fish fat was very cheap. So, avulkan hayayin bezoil, here wine is cheap, v'amurias b'yoiker, and this fish is expensive, v'chashin la'aruve. So that's the idea. So, kista demorias beluma, kista dechamra bedalid lumi. So basically, originally I wasn't afraid that they were going to put in wine because wine was so expensive, so they weren't going to use the wine. But now that you've arrived here, in which this fish is of very expensive, and wine is cheap, so therefore they'll put in wine. That's why I'm concerned now. Maybe they added wine somewhere else, right? Maybe where wine was cheap somewhere else, right? How do we know necessarily that it wasn't done before? So I'm like, Hasam ikule ubshuri ika. Over there were these whirlpool waters. So says Rashi, Mayim shahoychim aklosoin, like they were like going all over the place. The ein moishche hasvina There's no way they were able to go there. So you're saying, well, I know while they were traveling, they could have gone to this other location which had cheap wine. They could have done there. No, there's no way because that those waters were too dangerous. Says question 1: Ezim Morius, the Shuman Dugim, this fatty fish of Akum Mutter Bachilo. What kind is mutter? So either Sha'uman Pamrishan B'Sheni, first or second time of an uman, or B'Makam Shayayin Yakar B'Morius B'Zoil. If wine is very expensive, so they're not going to be adding this wine to it. So therefore, you don't have to worry in that situation. Okay, let's see, maybe TA 16, Liba de Rabmeir. Okay, I didn't do that yet. Okay, we'll get to that. All right, let's keep going. So v'gavina space unki. So we said there's also a machlokes or man tanaka and the chachamim regarding this cheese of this location. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish himnei ma'aser gavinas unki. So why is this cheese aser? For the practical reason is because these animals are aser b'hana, that where the cheese came from, because the majority of them are mamish used for Avodah Zarah. And therefore, because of that, pretty logical reason, you're not allowed to do it. And therefore, that's why Rameir asks Bahana. So my area Roiva Golim Afil Miyad Nami. I understand. According to Rameir, it's because the majority are Oyibad Avodah Zarah. So what do you mean? Even if it was a miyat, according to Rameir, the whole Rameir Chayish Miyuta. We know that Rameir is always chayish even for a minority, as we find Masechtas Yivamas regarding a katan or a katana, that they cannot do chalitza or yibum. Why not? A katan, maybe he'll be a sris. A katana, maybe she'll be an islandess. Well, what's the chances that a woman's going to be an islandess or a child will be a sris? Namely, that they're incapable of having children. That's not a very strong possibility. It's a miyut. But Rameir still says we don't want a katan or katana do chalitza or yibum because of that concern. So why do we have to mention the case that we're tailing the case of roiv, even a miyut? So iyam roiv, if as we mentioned roiv ika miyut, then there is such a thing as a miyut. Says Rashi, I amrit rov a golem nishchatam bodos chachavim ika meiser gavina mishum chashasha the miyut kevas asuras bahana. The Rova Golem Havimiyat L'Gabi Shar Behema Shemamidin Behen Bikviu same. Because the truth is, if we look at the grand scale, then it's still a minority. And therefore, even if you say correctly, we're going to go Basar Roiv here, by the grand scale, it's still a miyat. If you want to tell me that it's the minority is for Avodah Zarah. Kivandi ikarava goam de enish chatam v'schachavim. You can nami shar behemas de enish chatam v'schachavim in general. So havile miyuta de miyuta oichash Rameir. Rameir is only chash for a miyut. He's not chash miyuta de miyuta, and therefore that's the reason why we don't mention that case. That's why instead we mention that we're talking about a situation where it's roiv or goam or Avodah Zarah. So I'm going to Rav Shimon Bar Alikil, Rav Shimon ben Lakish, Kinish Chatin Avodas Kachavim. So let's say it's taka used for Avodas Kachavim, my Havi. Well, what's the whole problem? Ba'athu Deshari. You're the one that mocked it anyway. Didmar Shaychanis Behema. Person shechs an animal. Lizrek Dam Avodas Kachavim. And the intention is to do the Zrikas Dam for an idol. Or lahaktir chelbo v'eschachavim, or to take its fats and mamish burn it on the mizbeah, on their altar. Rav Yochanan Emra Surah, because ksavar mechashim me'avoida la'avoida, and this is in Zvachim, that you're mechashmin me'avoida la'avoida. So if you have an improper thought during shchita, or you have an improper thought during shchita about a different avoda, does that passel it? Savar mechashim me'avoida avoda ve'alfinin chutz mifnim. Because we're not, we don't say that we're mechashmi avodah avodah. Let's look in Rashi. So Amar Asur Ksav mechashmi avodah avodah yalfin chutz mifnim. We're reish lakish alfinan. The pnim who the ayim merachvana hashaychan amas lizroi kasadam. Pigel. Let's say you shecht a carbon and your intention is to b'shas shchita is you're going to do the zrikas adam in an improper way. So the din is that's an improper thought. It's called pigul. Now v'afar of the loy zarak tavi mechashi mi'avodah avodah mi'avodah zu al chaverta. So while you're doing one avodah, your cheshbon was on a different avodah, and the question is, does that actually work? So we see that's actually a machlokus. So Amulei Tarminoch Shatcha, says Rashi, Yorim Mazacha, lift up your mazel. Ba'omer b'gemar zvicha hu avot. Ba'omer b'gemar zvicha hu uvda. Says Rashi, Shichishev al shchita atzmo v'zchachava. It's not that his machshava was during shchita for a different avodah, and then you're right, it's a machlokas there, mechashmi avodah avodah. Now over here, Hitaka had the machshava during shchita for an improper machshava about the shchita itself. Okay, and with that we will stop. Okay, let's maybe see another question. Question question TA 16. The livro amer the chayshu miyuta madin hagvinus b'makom shroy v'gom ein nishchatim la'avodah zarah. Umadua. So he says in that case, taka would be mutter, because there's a roy v'gom the la'avodah kachavim, v'gam ika shar behemos, other animals the ein nishchatim la'avodah zarah. V'havulei hanach de nishchatin miyuta de miyuta. Ramer is only chash for a miyut, but not on a miyut of a miyut. Adkan.